very first girlfriend. This boy from Gibsonville, North Carolina is suddenly going to all these foreign countries. It was magical. It was exciting. We were in the barracks that were formerly part of the Luftwaffe. And it was an air base. And they had underground tunnels that were still there from the war. We went down to the motor pool and there were bullet holes in the walls of the motor pool. Going, wow, this is just like the movies. It was the best of times, but the worst of times. One morning, I was down at the motor pool, and by this time I was a Jeep driver. And the sergeant came out and he says, Moon, jump in that Jeep and take Bloomberg to the hospital. He's got to get an x-ray over in Wurzburg. And I said, but Sarge, the old man said, no, we're not to drive that Jeep until we get some special training. Now here's the thing. I was trained on an M38 Jeep. M38 Jeep is made out of steel. It's wide. You couldn't turn it over with a crane. And suddenly they were asking me, what a great idea. They're coming out with a new idea for a Jeep. It's tall, far off the ground, top heavy, made out of aluminum. Hundreds of GIs were hurt in that Jeep, by the way, before they finally got the idea, this is not working, and then it came back to this style, and you know that today is a Humvee. You couldn't turn a Humvee over if you tried. But all of a sudden, a bunch of GIs were turning this over. The sergeant says, I don't care what the old man says, get in that Jeep and take Bluebird to the hospital. So I did. I got in a Jeep, Bloomberg with me. We were on our way to the hospital. It was a foggy morning in Germany. It was a very small little road. It was covered with dew, damp. I go around a curve, and all of a sudden, sure enough, here we go off a cliff.
Oh.
I woke up for the first time underneath the Jeep. The second time, I was pulled out of the Jeep and I was laying on the side of an embankment. Third time I woke up, I was in a German hospital with the nuns, with the flying nuns. I looked around, and 3 days later I woke up in a hospital. I had broken my pelvis, ruptured my spleen, which had been removed, ruptured my bladder, and I could hardly move. And I woke up that Sunday morning like this, and I still remember seeing the orderly there. Very funny kind of guy. He said, are you in pain? I said, yes. He says, I don't feel a thing. Oh, the GIs, don't you love them? But a month and a half in Wurzburg Army Hospital, and then they put me on a plane and shipped me, along with about 100 other GIs that had been hurt, to Walter Reed Army Hospital in Washington, D.C. And I was on a gurney like this, going into Walter Reed for further work. I had another operation coming up because I had abscess inside my body. And I happened to meet a guy that looked like something from Halloween. His name was Jim. And the whole point of this is, I can tell you about Jim. The guy on the right, by the way, as you're looking at the picture, is me. The guy on the left is Jim. Yeah. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. I go into the hospital, and I never met a more affable, friendly, joking kind of people in my life. There was a guy there who had lost one of his legs in Vietnam. By the way, we weren't supposed to be in Vietnam then, but we were. And he was in a bar in Saigon, and suddenly he looked down, and somebody had rolled a hand grenade into the bar. Blew his leg off. I said, well, how'd you feel about that? He said, well, I woke up one morning, he said, I had one tennis shoe too many. And he went through therapy. And it was a fun time, it was a bad time. Jim had his face burned off. Jim had no ears, his nose had been burned off, and you can see he's hiding his hands because he's kind of embarrassed about taking the picture. He has no fingers. But Jim had, and all the guys there had the greatest sense of humor, and it gave me a new outlook on life. It was one of the best times of my life when I'm laying there in the hospital, one of the best times of my life, because they brought that humor. They had no reason to be happy, but they were happy and they were funny, and we had a good time together. We were always laughing. And Jim got new ears. Back in those days, they couldn't manufacture or make actual ears, so he got plastic ears. They were really real, rubber ears. They were very realistic. And Jim would come out in the morning and say, "Hey, are my ears on straight?" We had a new nurse in the ward one day, and he comes out one morning, he has an ear glued to his forehead. You should have seen the look on her face. We go down to a local bar, we get a weekend pass, and we call ourselves a cripple patrol because, we're with wheelchairs and crutches and all kinds of things like that. And we go down to the local bar, and Jim says, "You watch this." He says, "I bet I can get us free drinks." So he goes to the bartender and he bets the bartender a round of drinks that he could blow smoke through his ear. And of course he takes smoke through his ear. For me, it was one of the most wonderful, glorious, awful times of my life. And it gave me a new outlook. Whatever happens to us, it's an old cliche, but look on the bright side and have fun and enjoy it. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Madam Toastmaster.